My name is Dave Christie, and I am a member of the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee and the Northwest representative of the Schiller Institute. So welcome, and I would like to also thank the other sponsors of this event, the North America China Council and the Russian American Youth Association. And especially Sergei Gladish of the Russian American Youth Association, as well as the regional president Misha Savatyev, and also Tim Yanovsky, the secretary, who will be speaking on Raya's behalf at the later part of this panel, and also Diana Wu of the North America China Council and other members of the North America China Council that we'll introduce later when the afternoon panel begins. So that being said, is beginning introduction. We're obviously gathered in a time of very intense crisis globally, the danger of a war with Russia and China, but also a moment of opportunity to bring the nations of the world together in a spirit of harmony and economic development and cooperation, and that really is what we'll be discussing through the course of the afternoon here, or through the course of the day here. Now this morning we have the opportunity to speak with Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, who have led a fight for 40 plus years, well, I suppose with Lynn's case even more years than that. But I'll say a few words of introduction before they begin. But what we'd like to do is start out with a musical offering. And so we'll have Svetlana Efimchik and Anastasia Valenkina to perform the Russian national anthem, and then that'll be followed by our local Schiller Institute chorus, which will be performing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So I think we'll start out with that.
Россия, священная наша держава, Россия, любимая наша страна, могучая воля, великая слава, одна ты такая на все времена. Славься, Отечество наше свободное, братских народов союз вековой, предками данная сила народная. Славься, страна, мы гордимся тобой. От южных морей до полярного края раскинулись наши леса и поля. Одна ты на свете, одна ты такая, хранимая Богом, родная земля. Славься, Отечество наше свободное, братских народов союз вековой, предками данная. Мудрость народная, славься, страна, мы гордимся тобой. Широкий простор для мечты и для жизни, грядущие нам открывают года. Нам силу дает наша верность отчизне, как было, так есть и так будет всегда. Славься, Отечество наше свободное, братских народов союз вековой, предками данная. Мудрость народная, славься, страна, мы гордимся тобой.
Okay, so boy, we could probably have an entire day-long presentation about the life of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and their mission. But I will try to keep my introductory remarks about them short. But you know, to be honest, we would not be having a discussion about the One Belt, One Road, the new Silk Road, the potential of the nations around the world to come together right now, were it not for their work. And just as a brief sense of things, Lyndon LaRouche forecast the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s when they brought in the rampant speculative looting operation that really marks the current global economy, and called for the creation of an international development bank, which really is the model that we now see for the BRICS New Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. This is an echo of what Lynn called for over 40 years ago. And furthermore, what Mr. LaRouche did is he knew that we had to break the Cold War dynamic, and created the Strategic Defense Initiative as a way to bring the Soviet scientists with the US scientists together to develop a technology that would make nuclear warfare obsolete. That was known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, and that was adopted by Ronald Reagan. It was one of the key factors of the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan's life, which was trying to eliminate the influence of LaRouche and the grouping that he worked with. And that was also the adoption of that led to then eventually Mr. LaRouche's imprisonment in 1989. And that was at a time when the world was poised to move on what he had laid out after the fall of the Berlin Wall, of bringing the nations of Europe together and effectively having Russia act as a bridge to Asia and really which is the current kernel of what is now known as the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road program. That was not realized at that time. There was a series of assassinations and so forth. And while Mr. LaRouche was in prison, his wife, Helga LaRouche, laid forward or organized a series of conferences internationally, which is now on the Silk Road concept. And it's these conferences over that period that have laid the foundation for what is, again, today the One Belt, One Road concept. And so I think I just wanted to give some people a sense of that who may not be so familiar with Lyndon and Helga's LaRouche's life. But I think that perhaps the best sense will be given by them. So is this ready to go? So Lynn and Helga, are you ready to go here?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me make a couple of introductory remarks, and then following that, both Lynn and I will be more than happy to answer all questions and respond to your comments which you may have. So, I mean, people in Europe, and we are talking to you from Europe, have right now a very eerie feeling of being engulfed in so many crises that it's very difficult to keep a perspective. You have unbelievable explosion of terrorism. You have the pending collapse of the transatlantic financial system. In the aftermath of the Brexit, Great Britain leaving the euro, the EU may disintegrate. You have an increasing awareness of the danger of a confrontation with Russia over the NATO expansion. You have the crisis in the Pacific around the South China Sea. But then you also have an unbelievable sense of cultural crisis. So people really have a hard time to figure out, where should the future be. We personally are still under the impression of what happened last night in Munich, where a young man of 18 years, went into a shopping mall and then killed 9 people, and then killed himself, many more wounded. And that just, a few days after this unbelievable massacre in Nice, where a crazy young person took a truck and just drove down the alley at the 14th of July national holiday celebration, killing 84, wounding more than 300 people. And for France, this was really the 5th large terrorist attack within 1.5 years, starting with Charlie Hebdo in January last year, and then these unbelievable massacres. So, if you look at terrorism, I think that is one reason why we need to have a different approach to global politics. You had in 30 nations, in 4 continents, literally almost 100 terrorist attacks in several countries, one attack after the other, like Iraq or Turkey recently. And I would really single out terrorism as one of the absolute enemies of all of mankind, which is why we need to shift gears. Then you have, as I mentioned, the almost 100% certain coming crash of the transatlantic financial system. Only 6 years or after 8 years after 2008, when with Lehman Brothers, you almost had a meltdown of the entire transatlantic system. Now, because the governments didn't do anything to correct the casino economy, which led to this crisis, all the parameters are much worse than 2008. The indebtedness of the banking system is much worse. The government and other debt have increased by 40%. You have a new Italy crisis. Italy sits on 360 billion non-performing debt, which is not a banking crisis, but which is the result of insane austerity policy implemented by the so-called Troika, the IMF, the EU Commission, and the European Central Bank. Then you have Deutsche Bank, which, according to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, represents right now the greatest risk to the international financial system. And naturally, in the consequence of the Brexit, the British banking system, the City of London, is very shaky, and you have a collapse in the commercial real estate sector. And right now you have a blame game. Which crisis is worse? Is it the Italian crisis? Is it Deutsche Bank? They have a derivative exposure of 55 trillion euro. That's about $60 trillion, of which basically half is really unsellable and belonging to level 3. Deutsche Bank has a derivative exposure which is about 12 times that of the GDP of the German economy on an annual basis. So this thing could blow, and right now what the European and other central banks are doing with their so-called unorthodox monetary measures, meaning quantitative easing, money printing, meaning negative interest rate, which makes all savings a permanent loss, and naturally now the completely crazy discussion about helicopter money, which is the idea you just throw money out of helicopters as much as needed to prevent a collapse of the entire system. Now, right now, our best information is that all the printing presses of the central banks are printing physical money to be prepared for the case of a pending collapse. Now, if this is not changed, then the life savings and the savings of all the people who have earned their money with honest work, they will lose everything. And as one banker in the recent period told us, if this is not changed, the future of Europe is chaos and revolution. Now, this is just two crises, but the military confrontation with Russia, as represented by the NATO expansion to the Russian borders, as it was again decided at the recent NATO summit in Warsaw, really represents the danger, together with certain other policies, really going in the direction of a potential first use of nuclear weapons, means that we are sitting not only on a Cold War, but a Cold War which could become a hot war any moment. And maybe as dangerous is the crisis in the South China Sea, where if you look at the historical records, and China just produced a white book on the history of the South China Sea, which I recommend everybody to read, because it's a very, very detailed study on how these different islands and reefs and shoals in the South China Sea belong to China, going way back to the Han Dynasty, that is about 2,000 years ago. And nevertheless, because the United States insists on the unipolar world, and Obama said it in an interview with the Washington Post 3 months ago, very blatantly, he said the United States sets the rule, be it TPP or for the South China Sea, for that matter, and not China. But the problem is, if you don't change course, if you don't move away from geopolitical confrontation, doom of civilization is guaranteed. Now, I could list a whole bunch of other problems, but I want only to mention one other thing, and that is that the transatlantic sector right now finds itself in an absolute cultural decay, in a cultural degeneracy, where each time you think the bottom has been reached, they come up with a new level of degeneracy, and one of the recent ones is the insane Pokemon playing of adult people going around in the real world, but playing Pokemon on their smartphone, and many people have been killed already because they don't pay attention to the traffic or some other dangers in their real environment. Now, I only want to touch upon these different aspects of the crisis to make one fundamental point, that we have reached a period in human civilization that if we continue with these present policies, strict monetarism, neoliberal casino economy, confrontation for geopolitical interest, and a totally depraved cultural life, the danger is that we could quickly come into a war of extinction. Many military experts have warned that the chance of even an arbitrary accidental World War III has been never, or is greater right now than during the height of the Cold War, which, as you know, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one of the Russian commentators put it quite correctly a couple of days ago, referring to these many incidents in the Baltic Sea or in the Black Sea where American warships and Russian fighter jets almost had incidents. So this Russian commentator said, I do not want to be dependent on the ability of a pilot and his flight potentialities if we have a war or not, because if this pilot makes a mistake, you could have World War III. That is the condition of civilization, and that is why we have been campaigning since quite a while, but in the recent period very, very passionately for a new paradigm, to change geopolitics and move mankind to a new era of civilization where not the geopolitical interest of one nation or a group of nations is the basis of action, but that we define the future of mankind as that which is common to all of us, that we look at the present from a distance from 100 years in the future, looking back, or even 1,000 years in the future, looking back to the present, and then defining where should mankind be and how do we get out of this? How do we make the jump, the new level of thinking which will allow us to avoid all of these dangers? Now, fortunately, the alternative is absolutely visible already. We in the Schiller Institute, who have been fighting what we used to call the Eurasian land bridge since more than 25 years, were extremely happy when President Xi Jinping in September 2013 in Kazakhstan put the new Silk Road on the agenda. And if you look at the tremendous progress the new Silk Road has made in those almost 3 years, it is absolutely breathtaking. Not only has China offered many other countries to participate in the Chinese economic model, which has caused the admiration of anybody who has looked at it closely. China is now the leading nation in terms of fast train systems. China is now exporting that kind of fast trains to many parts of Asia. Almost 70 countries are already participating in the new Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Road, and also the new banking institutions like the AIIB, the New Development Bank, the new Silk Road Fund, the Maritime Silk Road Fund. And it is expected that if no major catastrophe happens, by the end of the year, probably 100 nations will participate in this new economic alliance. Now, the new Silk Road is being built in the tradition of the ancient Silk Road, which goes back almost more than 2,000 years to the Han Dynasty. And at that time, the old Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road, was not only an exchange of products, of silk, of porcelain making, of paper making, of book printing, but especially an exchange of technologies, of the knowledge how to make silk, how to make porcelain, and also of culture and philosophical ideas. And it brought forward all the countries which have participated in it. Now that's exactly the same idea of the new Silk Road today, because what people in the West tend to not understand is that China really means it's serious when it says the new Silk Road is based on a win-win strategy. The West always says, yeah, but this is only China's interest, but it's okay. China should pursue its interest, but all the countries which have entered these negotiations and agreements with China have confirmed that it brings them very much advantages too. Like Eastern Europe, for example. Eastern Europe is now working together with China on the building of fast trains in the Balkans, in Eastern and Central Europe, something which the EU decided not to do. So the East European countries are very happy to do this with China. Now, the new Silk Road is an absolutely win-win conception because it goes back to the question of how to develop the real economy and not have the casino economy which only makes the speculators and the banks rich. But the new Silk Road is based on the idea of increasing the productivity of the labor power and the industrial capacities of each country participating in it. And that is something which has been lost in the transatlantic sector since, maybe in the United States since the assassination of Kennedy. Maybe in Europe it was a little bit more uneven, but in general the present policies of the EU are also not exactly in that tradition, as you can see by the horrible condition of Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, but also many other countries in Europe. So therefore, what we have proposed, we have to have a complete new paradigm. The Schiller Institute and EIR, we have worked on what we have been working on since almost 26 years, how the new Silk Road must become the world land bridge, i.e. a development perspective for the development of the whole world. And this perspective to extend the new Silk Road to every part of the world and have all the great nations, United States, Russia, China, India, but also Iran, Egypt, European nations, all work together for the development of those parts of the world which are not yet developed is the absolute key. Look at the Middle East or Southwest Asia, a region which has been completely destroyed by wars which were based on lies, as just now came out with the Chilcot Commission, which clearly stated that Tony Blair launched wars of aggression knowingly that these were based on lies. Now, what is the result of it? Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and many areas around that have been thrown into a complete disarray, chaos, refugees, terrorism. All of this is the result of these unlegitimate and aggressive wars. Now, we think that this needs to be investigated in every country, and the responsibles have to be put in front of trials, Nuremberg trials, because this has launched a crisis of civilization which is unbelievable. Or look at the condition of Africa. 50 years or more of IMF conditionalities have destroyed the possibility for people to live. Therefore, you have refugees coming by the millions from Southwest Asia, from Africa. People take a 50% risk to drown in the Mediterranean, including their babies, because they have no ability to live where they're coming from. Now, the refugee crisis is therefore not a European problem. It is a problem of civilization. Can we, in time, when everything goes into haywire, everything is collapsing, you have a feeling that the whole world is engulfing in problems, in one crisis after the other, can we, in time, shift gears and say, we have to have a new level of cooperation, and that is the new Silk Road. The United States needs a new Silk Road. China has built until the year 2015, until the end of it, 20,000 kilometers fast trains. The United States has built none. China is planning to have 50,000 kilometers of fast trains until the year 2020, connecting every major city in China. We propose that that should be built for the United States as well. Would it not make sense to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States and also, to connect the large cities of the US with fast train systems? Go back to the kind of reconstruction of the Roosevelt period, what Roosevelt did after 1933, the New Deal, Bretton Woods banking separation, a reconstruction finance corporation as a financing means. Well, in Germany, the reconstruction after the Second World War was done exactly on that basis. It was called the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, which was modeled on the Reconstruction Finance Corporation of Roosevelt. Now we propose that we must have a reform of the casino economy in the United States and Europe, and then go back to the Roosevelt policy of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, Glass-Steagall, banking separation, do the same thing in Europe, and then Europe and the United States could join with the new development bank, the AIIB, in the building of these large projects to bring peace and prosperity back to the regions which are now collapsing. Now, I think it's eminently possible. And since I believe that on the one side, we are on the verge of possible extinction of civilization, because if it comes to a war, it will not be a limited war, it will be a global war. And if one nuclear weapon is being used, all of them will be used. That's the nature of nuclear war and nuclear weapons. But I believe also that the human being is capable of, when confronted with a great evil, to produce something even more powerful and more beautiful, and that the force of good can be and must be stronger than the force of evil. And that is why the Schiller Institute, since its very beginning, has always said we need to have a new world economic order based on more just principles, but it must be combined with a classical renaissance of classical culture. Now, we have to bring forward the great traditions of the best of what every nation has produced. In Germany, that happens to be the music from Bach, Mozart, if you count him as a German, and Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann. In China, it is clearly the tradition of Confucius. In India, it's the period of the Gupta period. In Russia, it's the period of Pushkin, Vernadsky. And in each nation, we have to bring forward these best traditions and make them known to all other cultures. Because people have no real understanding about the beauty of the other nations and the other cultures. For example, when we had recently in Berlin a conference on these subjects, we had a beautiful concert where we had a Russian children chorus, very small children, and when we were talking all day long about the danger of nuclear war, and then in the evening you had a beautiful concert where very small Russian children were singing very beautiful. There was not one person who had no tears in their eyes, because they understood that it is our obligation to create a future for these children. Then we had a very powerful, beautiful Chinese chorus, and people in the audience were amazed how beautiful these Chinese voices were sounding, because they had no idea that this is possible, because they have never encountered it. And then we had naturally music from Bach, and finally the Schiller chorus performed the coronation mass from Mozart. When we had in April a similar concert in New York, we had representations of Italian, German, Chinese, Indian culture. And the most striking example was a beautiful presentation by Professor Ben Wang, who gave us a presentation about Chinese literati painting. That is something which is uniquely specific to Chinese culture, and it shows the unity of poetry, painting, and calligraphy in one piece of art. And people could understand the metaphor being expressed by these three art forms expressed in one, which you do not find anywhere in European culture. But people were absolutely struck that the knowing of the other culture represented for them a window into something which belongs to universal history, and they were so happy to discover that beauty which they had no inkling that it exists. So I think that this is the way to go. I think if we all put our efforts together and represent very clearly the economic perspective, how to get out of this crisis, how to avoid a financial crash of the financial system of the transatlantic sector, but then combine the economic perspective of enlarging the new Silk Road to become a world land bridge, to develop Southwest Asia, to develop Africa and other parts of the world, and give the people who are now becoming terrorists because they have no future in the present system, to give them a real perspective for their own life and their own future, that we then can indeed get the world moved out of this present very, very dangerous moment. So I think if we work together to this end, everything will be possible.
There are obstacles into this kind of program. The case of Einstein, who is probably one of the greatest minds that had ever appeared on the American frame or otherwise. The point is what is the characteristic which defines humanity as superior to, as distinct from, all other known forms of human life, in particular, particularly in all forms of life in general. What is the source? What is the force that we must consider? Well, again, go directly to Einstein. Einstein understood that mankind was not a fixed species, that mankind was a species which created new conditions in the universe, not something as a practical change, but something absolutely new in the universe. That was Einstein. And he still is Einstein. To this day, Einstein's role is still of that same nature. What we find is that the important thing is, how do we discover the nature of the true form of human existence? And that means a human form of existence beyond anything that any other form of life, such as animal life, could continue. There is animal life which does try to accomplish that, but it does not do it. And therefore, what we have to do is take the kinds of discoveries which we do as practical discoveries, practical progress, and we have to turn that kind of progress into something we understand as more universal. In other words, people do understand things about the change in human life. That is common. It's known. People can become educated, develop to a higher level of achievement. But there's something else. There's only one species that we know of which has these common characteristics, and that is the human mind. The human mind itself. And in order to do that, we have to feed back our knowledge of the human mind and apply what we know of the knowledge of the human mind to the practice of the human mind. And I think the rest can be left to Helga.
Okay, so Lynn and Helga will be available for any questions that people have. Let's do a quick mic check here. Can somebody, just see if that works. Okay, so I think that's good to go. So Anybody who is welcome to ask a question, just come up to the mic here. Yep.
Hi, my name is Chris. Wondering if you've heard anything about a commercial, German commercial banker with a millionaire, and anyway, there was a question about the guy's cash and negative interest rates, and he's actually being charged for having his money in the bank, and the millionaire asked, what about taking cash out? I said, no, that equals freedom. Have you heard about that? Said as a, it was published last year.
I'm not familiar with that commercial.
Oh, I'll see if I can't hunt it down and send you the link some way. That
Okay.
they're looking to do away with cash, and then Larry Summers and the European leaders over the three people that basically run Europe have said they're going to do away with cash. So we're shifting away from checks and smartphones to all digital money, and then we won't have any freedom to be able to do conduct commerce among ourselves, and we'll have complete control.
Well, yeah, I know that there has been such a debate, but I don't think that this will go anywhere because in Germany there is a big resistance against that idea. I think the bigger danger right now is what I said before, and that is that we have been told by people from the banking community that the central banks are printing money, physical money, not electronic money, but physical money notes like crazy right now. And that is because they know perfectly well that this system could come down end of next week. Next week you have the result of the stress test which the EZB conducted with several banking systems, for example the Italian banks. And right now, I mean, it goes a little bit very far into details, so I don't know if it's adequate to go into it here now, but the European Union has adopted a law which is called bail-in, which you also have in the Dodd-Frank bill, which is the idea that in the case of an insolvency of a bank or some other financial institution, that you can apply the so-called Cyprus model. That is, that you take a haircut of those people or those people's savings, and people who have savings or bank stocks or bank bonds, and you just write down the losses and make the people who are the savers pay. Now, in the case of Cyprus, I think this led to something like a 60% haircut. And in the Italian case, it already was applied in 4 regional banks, which many people lost their life savings. Many people committed suicide because they had just lost everything, and it caused a complete revolt. And therefore, Prime Minister Renzi is trying to negotiate a deal with the EU. Whereby they would make an exception and let the Italian banks be bailed out again, which is also being opposed, by many people because it has also been based on taxpayers' money. So probably they will try to come out with some compromise between bailout and bail-in, but that is just a short-term postponement of the crisis. And right now, the biggest danger is an uncontrolled collapse of the financial system. And if that would occur, or if this helicopter money idea is being pursued, people are going to lose everything they had. And naturally, this will have absolutely uncalculable social consequences. Already France is a social powder keg. Southern Europe is a social powder keg. And the only way how we will get out of it is the immediate implementation of the Glass-Steagall law, which fortunately is in both platforms of both parties in the Democratic and in the Republican Party. But, you know, it's a far cry from having it in the platform, from being implemented by the Congress and the Senate. But, you know, I think that we are really on an absolute desperate moment where only the approach of Mr. LaRouche, the famous four principles, can be a solution, namely Glass-Steagall, close down the speculative part of the economy, just write it off, if need be, close down these investment banks because they have no purpose anyway. But then you need a credit system in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton to give credit for public projects, and the extension of the Silk Road to the United States would be the perfect way to go. But then you need to go back to the principles of productivity in the labor force, space program, which, you know, would bring forward that creativity in the best possible way, and implement what Mr. LaRouche just said with the focus on Einstein, namely that we have to go back to recognize that the only source of social wealth is the creativity of labor power, and therefore any government which would be concerned about the public good would try to get the creativity of their own people increased and not do what is presently happening in the United States and Europe, where people are consciously dumbed down and becoming more unproductive and stupid by the day. So we need to really reverse course and pick up on what Lynn just said. You know, people have the potential to be genius, and that is what we have to bring forth.
I agree. I just want to see, regardless what groups we encounter or differences of opinion, left to right or middle or whatever, we should all join together. This is a crisis that we're approaching.
Yep. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, so as people see, there's a chair right there. Robbie, real quick, why don't you just come sit in that chair then? But then Robbie's here, so just there. See that chair in the middle? Just if you have a question, come sit there and then wait your turn.
Hello, Helga and Lynn. My name is Robbie. I'm from Vancouver, and I just want to start by thanking you for your hard work, your passion, your dedication to the human species. And being from Vancouver, we have a contingent of about, 15 or 16 people here from Canada. And I have a question for both of you in the context of actually what both of you said. And that is, but I guess I suppose I can provide a little pretext for that. Canadians, it's hard being an activist in Canada. Canadians often see themselves being, especially in the world, as kind of innocuous peacekeepers and apolitical. And of course, as LaRouche activists, we know very well that this is not true of the intelligentsia, the intellectual layers, and the government. So in the context of the geostrategic situation, Helga, that you've outlined, as well as the context of Lyndon's comments, I'm going to quote you, Lyndon, I hope you don't mind, but for this context of my question about Canada-U.S. relations, about Canadian-European relations, about the world land bridge, how that affects North America as a whole, but how to activate people. And I'm quoting you here from one of your papers, and you said, "We come to know a principle as distinct from merely learning to mouth a political correct verbal formulation of a mere doctrine by reenacting the mental act of discovery. A student is able to relive the thought process of original discovery with the sovereign domain of the individual mind of the discoverer as much as thousands of years past." And that quote really struck me. And I want to be able to inspire other people, especially my fellow Canadians, to become world citizens and really take up this charge. And I just would like your comments in general in terms of Canada, North America, the World Land Bridge, and leave it as broad as possible.
Lynn, you want to?
Well, I think I don't see this as a real policy. It's the other characteristics that we have to deal with are adequate. If you once you get into the idea of the development of the powers of the human mind as such, you have reached the pinnacle of everything. And the fact that you may have avoided assuming that development is a destructive representative of a destructive force. The thing to do is to understand that we have to go beyond what mankind has done in terms of classes of strategies of people and so forth, and to realize, as Einstein did, that mankind had to realize that the universe is under process of creation itself. And within that body of creation potential, what Einstein did in defining what is the nature of the discovery of the human mind, that thing, it works. That works. Sometimes it doesn't work because it's not worked. But otherwise, when properly worked, that does work. Unfortunately, the occasion of such methods, as I've just indicated, these are rare. And it's necessary to go to what is the meaning of the human mind in creating the development of the human intellect. That's what the issue is. And there is a form of the human intellect which by it and of itself, by its nature, is a creative force. And what we do when we do the best discovery work that we do in life for mankind is we're trying to approximate something close to a perfect idea of the development of the human mind, as the human mind as such.
Well, I just would like to add, that the Schiller Institute is called Schiller Institute because I believe that Friedrich Schiller has also contributed something extremely important to this education of the human personality, and that is the aesthetical education to the level of reason. Now, I think anybody who looks around in the United States or in Europe right now will notice that especially the young people have really become so brutalized that it is hair-raising. When they are 14 or 13, they know it all. They know pornography, they know perversion. They use the unbelievable language when they're talking to each other, reflecting a fall back into barbarism. I think it has never been like that in history because, with the technology, smartphones, other social media and so forth, people can communicate nowadays around the globe very quickly. But if it doesn't go along with the education of the character, with the education of the emotions fitting to the level of reason, then people, will use all of these things and being used for the absolute worst purpose. And that is why I want to really, I know you have on the program today a lot more examples, why we put such an unbelievable emphasis on classical culture and classical music in particular, because it is that which makes it easy among all languages or across all languages to participate in an understanding of this higher level of reason, what Lynn is talking about. Just a couple of days ago, I would say maybe 6 days ago, 6 days before the massacre in Munich occurred, there was a live transmission from Munich of the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, performed on the largest marketplace in the middle of Munich at the Odeon place. So they had a live concert of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony live in TV for everybody to watch. And I was struck because the moderator, being under the impression of the terrorist attack in Nice, where this crazy man had tracked down, almost 100 people with his truck driving into the crowd. So the moderator said, well, we need this beauty of music, the beauty of Beethoven, to remind ourselves that there is this higher level of reason and higher level of beauty. So under this impression, I listened to this performance, maybe even more conscious than I have done in the past. And when you listen to the Ninth Symphony, you realize that in the fourth movement, the music all of a sudden becomes very dissonant, very strange. It's a very strange part of this movement. And then the solo voice comes, this baritone who sings, oh no, not these sounds. Let us listen to more beautiful ones. And then the chorus comes and sings, Freude schöner Götterfunken, Tochter von Elysium. Joy, you spark of the gods, daughter of Elysium. All men become present, and so forth and so on. You know the text, and the music becomes so powerful and uplifting that people are evoked, and this divine spark is being called forth and awakened in them. And as Schiller said many times, it's the power of great art that it evokes a power in the people which even remains after the performance is over, so that it works on and it lives on in them, and they become better human beings as a result. Now, I think that is why we have this dialogue of classical cultures, and why we must absolutely strengthen that, because it's almost the most certain key to the inner works of the soul, and how we can, get people liberated from all the ugliness around them.
First of all, thanks for your explanation in more like cultural and philosophical point of view. Yeah, so I'm not from America, so my English can be kind of misunderstood by someone, but I'll still explain my point. I have a couple of questions, short questions. First, how do you think Brexit will influence on the world geopolitically and on Russia specifically? The second question, like the lady talked before about cryptocurrencies. I'd like to ask about cryptocurrencies also, about Ripple. Probably heard about that. It's a financial payment cryptocurrency for smart contracts. So what do you think about these two questions? The first about related to Russia, exactly, and second, cryptocurrencies like Ripple is upcoming future.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the second question?
It's a Ripple. Ripple, it's a cryptocurrency. It's an altcoin, because the lady before talked about cryptocurrencies, so I think probably we can talk about that right now too, because the topic already started.
Maybe Dave, you can reformulate the question, because I'm not sure I got it.
Can you hear?
Can you hear? Yeah, I'm asking about Ripple.
Yeah.
Ripple, is
is this the internet currency thing and,
exactly,
and
yeah,
so
this
forth?
Is
okay,
this is altcoin.
Cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
So that it's these what's the other one? Bitcoin.
It's like a Bitcoin, but it's a little bit different. Yeah.
It's basically like a free market thing on the internet, and you're not going to have national currencies any longer. You're just going to have the going market value for these bitcoins.
Exactly. I just want to hear your opinion. I think you know better than me. So.
Okay, I think that's good.
Yep.
So the Brexit on the geopolitics, and then this
the two
Bitcoin.
questions. Yeah.
Well, I think the Brexit thing is not really a surprise. As a matter of fact, anybody who was thinking about what is going on should have known that the vote in Great Britain would be exactly like that, going out of the EU. because this was not a vote against Europe, it was a vote against the perception of the people that the elites, the establishment of Europe has been utterly degenerate, unconsidering for the common good, and unjust, especially to the ever larger number of people becoming poor with this system. The rich become more rich, the middle class vanishes, and the poor people can't make a living anymore. Naturally, also other factors like, the refugees, but people who think about a little bit, they know perfectly that the refugees are not coming because they want to be refugees, but because they are running away from conditions in their country which are destroyed by war, by terrorism, by poverty. So you get back to what I said earlier, the Chilcot report, the role of Blair in bringing these wars. So the Brexit, in a certain sense, was presenting the bill to the City of London, to Brussels, to the policies which people perceived as utterly unjust. Now, I think it is a fair prognosis, and I'm not taking a big risk in making such a prognosis, that given the fact that the EU presently shows no sign of changing these policies, they stick to their monetarist policies, they stick to their unjust policies of confrontation against Russia. I think the disintegration process of the EU will continue. People are saying that today, for example, or yesterday, there was in Die Welt, that's a conservative daily in Germany, that Italy is a failed state. Now, that puts Italy in the same category like Somalia or Iraq, for that matter. And I can assure you the Italians will not be very happy with being put in this category by a German newspaper. So this will have a tremendous backlash. Also, the people who demand a referendum on the EU is becoming stronger. The next Austrian president may be somebody from the ÖVP, who has already announced that he wants to have a referendum on Austria's participation in the Euro and in the EU. So Italy, Austria, if things go in a certain direction in France, in Belgium, in Holland, all of these countries do not want to have this system anymore. And it's generally admitted that the EU is a failed system, and the Euro was a failed experiment implemented on Germany for geopolitical reasons at the time of German unification. So I think the only chance we will get out of this is we have to have a Europe from the Urals, or actually from the Pacific to the Atlantic, exactly as de Gaulle at the time had said. We need not a supranational EU bureaucracy, but we need to go back to sovereign nation states. And then Europe, being an alliance of sovereign nation states, could ally with the Eurasian Economic Union, which was basically developed by President Putin. And President Putin and President Xi Jinping announced several times they want to integrate the new Silk Road One Belt, One Road project with the Eurasian Economic Union, and Europe should cooperate with that. And that should all become an alliance of perfectly sovereign states who work together for a higher purpose of mankind, from the Atlantic to the Chinese Sea. I think if that is being put on the agenda, and then the United States should be invited to participate in such a new alliance, that is the only way to go.
Real quick. First off, let's
the second question. I think that doesn't mean much, because it's everything which belongs to the area of monetarism, neoliberal considerations of money is really of very little meaning, because this system is coming down, and what we need is a return to the economy of the real physical economy, and the currency, or rather the credit, should be just a tool with which you make the real economy function. So I don't think that these internet currencies mean much, because it's just a perpetuation of the illusion that money is a thing in itself.
Okay. There's questions.
Oh, hi, Lynn and Helga. It was a very brief question. I think it was about a week or two where LaRouche, you launched the initiative to save Deutsche Bank. And it seems like there's always foot dragging every time you launch a new initiative. Hopefully that's not the case. But I wanted you to say a few things about this new initiative, because it may not be.
This is very clear. The clear is that an international force moved into France in order to bring about a sabotage which brought around the collapse of the whole economy of France and Germany. And so this operation, which was engendered largely from France, from corrupt areas in France, can carry murders against people in Germany. And so the problem is the British system is the system which created the rotten system I've just referred to. And the British ruined France and caused the murder of the great leader of this process. So the problem is of that nature. So it was the evil represented by the British system, which was backed and steered by the French system of that time, and that's what caused the problem. And you will find in most of history that the failures of cultures have that characteristic. Any bad effect in any culture tends to be a product of some evil force inside that culture. We see that in terms of what is happening in the terrorism which is running in the past couple of days. This was something who created an evil force, a force of absolute evil, destructive force of evil, and brutal, very brutal. But finally, the population there, the leaders of the population there, did bring the territory under control. And hopefully they will be able to make the construction needed work. But the point is, in general, usual problem in society is that some culture or some part of culture is trying to destroy anything that is good about the same culture.
Well, let me just add this, because people may not be familiar with the significance of Alfred Herrhausen. Alfred Herrhausen was the chief of Deutsche Bank at the time when the Berlin Wall came down, and he was assassinated end of November, actually 3 weeks after the Berlin Wall had come down. And that particular murder had as much significance for the paradigm shift to the worse in Germany as the assassination of John F. Kennedy for the United States. Because if you remember, Kennedy was very, very optimistic. He had the idea of space travel, of unlimited self-perfection of human beings, of overcoming poverty in the developing countries, just an absolute optimistic world outlook and image of man. And when he was killed and his murder was covered up, the people of the United States became pessimistic. So much so that recently I have been saying that the Americans are almost as pessimistic as the Germans. But for Germany, this was absolutely crucial because maybe the older ones among you remember the unbelievable circumstances of the, when the wall came down and people from East Germany came and dancing on the Berlin Wall, hugging each other, crying. It was an unbelievable moment in history. And if Herrhausen would have been or continued to be the advisor of Helmut Kohl, the whole question of unification would have taken a completely different turn, because he was sort of the last moral banker in Europe, at least I know of, at least prominent one. And he wanted to forgive the debt of the Third World, because he said this debt is not payable anyway. He wanted to put the European, German, Russian relationship on a decent level. He wanted to develop Poland with the means of the Kreditanstalt used in the reconstruction of Germany. And so he had many, many sound policies, and all the people who knew him basically said he was a great human being, more important even than being a great banker. So when he was shot, as a message to Helmut Kohl, do not dare to use the moment of German unification to develop an independent, sovereign policy. And then, as we now know, Margaret Thatcher launched a campaign against Germany. Mitterrand, according to Jacques Attali, who was one of his closest advisors, who wrote a biography about Mitterrand, in which he said that Mitterrand threatened Germany with war at that moment if Germany would not be ready to give up the D-mark and replace it with the European common currency, the euro. Kohl knew at the time that the European common currency would not work without political union, and that the euro was against German interest, but he was basically surrounded by France, Britain, the United States, who all told him, you better capitulate and you give up the D-mark as a price for unification. So it was really this murder of Alfred Herrhausen, which is why the great historical chance of '89 did not lead to a new peace order of the 21st century, which would have been possible because when we proposed, and especially Lynn actually had proposed the productive triangle, Paris, Berlin, Vienna. This is an area of the size of Japan, and it still has the most productive concentration of especially Mittelstand, middle-level industry, very productive, very innovative, very creative. And the idea was to take that and develop so-called development corridors to Poland, to Ukraine, to the Balkans, and transform the Comecon countries with Western technology. And when the Soviet Union disintegrated in '91, we extended that productive triangle to become the Eurasian land bridge, to have development corridors combining the industrial and population centers of Europe with those of Asia through transport and development corridors. And that is what we called already then the new Silk Road. So we campaigned for this, for 25, 26 years, and now the new Silk Road is on the agenda, so it is very good. But all the destruction of Russia from '91 to '94, whereby the industrial potential of Russia was destroyed and collapsed to only 1/3, was the result of the same geopolitical policies which led to the murder of Herrhausen. And if you want to cure this policy, including the war danger, which right now is very, very acute, then we have to go back and change the policies, make a reset And given the fact that Deutsche Bank is about to blow, as a matter of fact, just yesterday reports were leaked that they are considering to give up universal banking and have an internal separation of their banking branches between a commercial branch giving credit to industry and separating that completely from their investment part, which is quite an admission because Deutsche Bank was always the universal banking model, and they basically admit that this is not working. Obviously, such a reform alone is not sufficient, but it is an interesting reflection of our campaign. So I would like to encourage you to study this period of history, because the connection between the murder of Kennedy and the murder of Herrhausen gives you the clue of where it went wrong in the history of both the United States and in Germany. And if you want to remedy it, we have to get the United States back on the track of Roosevelt and Kennedy, and we have to get Germany back on the track of Alfred Herrhausen if we want to get out of this crisis. So please do not block on this campaign.
Okay, Lynn and Helga, do you have time for one more question?
Yes. Yes, we do. The problem is we have to understand what the humanity is. And the key answers I've mentioned, indicated earlier, the key problem is mankind is a part of the space system. Mankind is a development process, a part of the space system. What happens is this phenomenon occurs as the space system occurs as a product of mankind's development. And mankind achieves this ability by going into the development of the minds of the human beings to get them to realize and capture and really capture the kind of possibilities, the potentiality of the human mind, of the entire human species. That's the point. And the big fight we have to maintain, the fundamental fight, is we have to recognize that mankind can be self-developed, aids of human guidance, and that this may discover what the real source of humanity is. And we say that the human being is a species unto itself. And mankind has to take this species and use it to itself to bring mankind into areas of achievement which mankind otherwise could not accomplish.
Hi, Helga. Hi, Lynn. I'm glad to be part of your organization. I'm glad to be here at the meeting tonight. But one thing that's really bothered me is it seems like the good leaders haven't been around for a while. I've heard very little dialogue on this, and it seems like the greediest, most evil people are in power. I don't know how we could be anywhere but on the ragged edge as a species without better leadership. I think a good leadership would solve a good share of the problems. Look at what we ended up with. Is it everything controlled by money? Is it legislation and elections being bought? Brain people?
I call it a satanic principle, that mankind has often been a satanic force. Most nations and cultures have either been wholly or partly products of these kinds of evil forces. So the problem of getting rid of the evil force tendency within society is what the problem is that you have to deal with. And as long as you want to tolerate this kind of things that operates commonly, if you want to take the U.S., for example, U.S. politics, if you take the U.S. program, U.S. politics, political action, you are going to produce hell. And you're producing hell now, and you'll produce more hell. So therefore, you've got to get away from that kind of thinking. And you've got to look for the question of, which I presented earlier, and Helga did also, is to go to the principle. What is the principle that frees mankind of that kind of degeneration? And you find that most of the case in South America, in Central America, in North America, in Europe, you have actually a demoralization in terms of function of the people throughout much of the planet. But the point is, the other side is, the evidence is clear, as Einstein's principle demonstrates, that that principle does provide guidance for achievement of the kind of life that the human species as a whole requires, which it has not done very well for a long period of time. But you have to look at it from that standpoint.
I want to only add two thoughts. One is that we published in the past quite a bit on a phenomenon which is very known in France called synarchy. I think in the United States you may also find literature about it. The synarchist was a movement of bankers in the 30s, 20s and 30s, who essentially, based on certain, I would say, almost fascist conceptions of men, decided that they would work together to make sure to move people in powerful positions, especially for the moment of crisis, so that these people would then make policies not in the interest of the common good, but in the interest of the bankers. And they would promote these people, they would, push their careers and so forth. And I think that that is what has largely happened because, in the United States, I'm sorry to say that with all the talk about democracy and human rights and whatnot, there is no democracy in the United States. If Wall Street can buy congressman seats and the seats of senators and by presidential campaigns, at least some of them, then there is no democracy. And I think the whole success of a certain person who has now become the candidate of the Republican Party is because people think that he will give it to them. I'm not, I don't want to comment on this any more than this, but this phenomena of synarchy, and please go to the search engine of our publications and look what we published about it, because I think it's a piece of history which is really worth to know. I mean, otherwise, I would just say, fortunately, there are some other countries who do have good leadership. I think that, Lynn has been emphasizing this a lot, and, Putin has proven to be a quite exceptional leader by developing the principle of the flank, which he did repeatedly, the last time very successfully in Syria. And I think the fact that I think presently something like 90% of the Russian people support Putin speaks for itself, that the Russian population is very conscious about the value of their leader, and therefore they are backing him the more he is being attacked by the West. Now, I find also another leader quite remarkable. I can only suggest, please read the speeches of Xi Jinping, who in my view is a deep Confucian thinker, and he is pursuing a Confucian policy for China, which is really outstanding and much too little known in the West. So there is a book called The Governance of China, where they published about 70 speeches of Xi Jinping, but there are many, many more. For example, one speech, or three speeches, which I liked, no, four speeches I liked in particular. One was the speech which Xi Jinping gave when he went to France. Another one he gave when he came to Germany about 2 years ago. Then a speech he gave in India, in New Delhi, and a speech he gave at the occasion of the birthday of Confucius. Now, if you dig out these speeches and read them, you will find there the footprint of the mind of a leader, which is what approaches what Plato called the philosopher king, which should be the quality of leadership. So don't give up hope. Just become a leader yourself for the United States and organize many, many people around it. We are not, fortunately, only looking at one country, but we are really looking at the entire potential of the human species, which is being tested right now. Can we come up with ideas which will bring us out of this present paradigm and establish a higher paradigm, a new paradigm, more in cohesion with the actual character of man, the way Lynn is describing it, in the tradition of Einstein, but also Vernadsky, Cusanus, Leibniz, and some of the other great minds, because that is the level we have to accomplish.
Okay, Helga, I think, and Lynn, I think I just asked you if you could do 2 more questions, but I want to ask you again, can you do 2 more questions?
Lynn says he can.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Helga. Your endless energy is just inspiring. I'd like to hear some input regards to the world's energy situation. I am aware, I'm in the nuclear industry in the Richland, Washington area, but I am aware that Germany has taken a turn in the last years since the large tsunami wave in Japan. They have turned away, Germany has turned away from the pursuit of nuclear power, while France, on the other hand, seems to be full steam, full speed ahead with nuclear power, as well as Vladimir Putin's aggressive efforts to build nuclear power plants all over Africa, helping India, and of course, in cooperation with Xi Jinping of China, the global outlook from the Eastern world and nuclear power seems very positive. Is there a